A mother's lifeless body lay on a bed whilst her 11-month-old baby girl is crawling over her, sobbing and desperately trying to wake her mummy. The father is lying on the floor, restrained by duct tape, falling in and out of consciousness. A home invasion gone terribly wrong, or something else? This is the tragic case of Caroline Crouch. 4:30 a.m. on the 11th of May 2021 in the suburbs of Athens, Greece, 31-year-old Babis is fast asleep whilst his wife lay next to him alongside their 11-month-old baby girl. He is abruptly woken up by 3 intruders who are wearing balaclavas and are armed with pistols. They grab him and push him to the floor. They proceed to tie him up using duct tape, and Babis is fighting against them with all his might. As he does so, one of the men's balaclavas slips and Babis manages to get a look at him. Overpowered by these 3 men, they tightly tie Babis's hands behind his back and blindfold him, wrapping the duct tape around his eyes, mouth and then neck. His heart is racing, and every time Babis tries to break free, the tape tightens around his neck, rendering him temporarily unconscious. In between these lapses of unconsciousness, he hears these men attacking his 19-year-old wife, Caroline. He feels completely helpless. He can't do anything. He then hears his baby daughter crying. The men are speaking in broken Greek and have Albanian accents. They are asking over and over again, "Where is the money? Where is the money?" A few weeks earlier, Caroline had been gifted €50,000 from her mother for her and Babis to buy a plot of land on which they were going to build their family home. A few days prior, they had withdrawn €10,000 of that money to begin the initial construction costs. Panicked and just wanting them gone, Babis tells them exactly where the money is, which is in an old Monopoly box. The men find and take this money but remain in the flat. They're going from room to room, stealing any items of value, mainly jewellery. They re-enter the bedroom and begin asking for more money. Babis explains that there isn't any more. They then hold a pistol to the 11-month-old baby girl. Caroline begins screaming hysterically. Babis is fighting against his restraints as he knows something is really wrong. Suddenly his wife falls silent and Babis loses consciousness. When he wakes up, all he can hear is his baby girl crying. Through a very small hole in the duct tape around his eyes, he spots his phone on the nightstand. It takes him 30 minutes to make his way over there, and using his nose, he manages to dial for the emergency services.
Capito quello che ma who is there?
The operator can barely hear him. It's very muffled as he has duct tape around his mouth. All she can hear is "help, help, ambulance." She asks where. Babis screams Gliconera, Gliconera, which is the suburbs in which they live. The police arrive and discover a completely ransacked apartment. The indoor security camera has been ripped from the wall and the memory card is gone. As they make their way to the staircase, they discover the family puppy has been strung up with her own lead on the staircase banister. As they go up the stairs to the bedroom, they find Babis on the floor. His hands and feet are tightly bound behind him and his eyes are covered in duct tape. On the bed is the deceased body of Caroline Crouch. Her baby girl is crawling over her, sobbing, trying to wake her. When they untie Babis and he sees his wife, he looks distressed. From the statement he gives, police conclude that 3 men entered the property whilst 1 stood watch outside, entered through a basement window and immediately killed the family dog in order to stop her from barking. For reasons not entirely known, they murdered Caroline. Perhaps her screams panicked them and they wanted to silence her. She was also a black belt in kickboxing, so perhaps she put up a fight which they were unprepared for. Forensics conclude that this would not have been a quick death. She would have been struggling for upwards of 6 minutes, fighting back. She would have been fully aware of what was happening. It would have been an agonizing death, and this was all done in front of her 11-month-old girl. Why they didn't kill Babis is unclear, perhaps because he kept losing consciousness, they assumed he was dead and then just left. When forensics arrive, they find no evidence. There's no fingerprints, no DNA, no footprints. They even swabbed the fingernails of Caroline and she would have put up a fight, but there's nothing under them either. This is very unusual and it leads police to believe that this crime was committed by professionals. Babis did see one of them and he is able to describe that man to the police. He says he was a tall, overweight, dark-skinned male who was under 30. They are able to create a composite sketch which is shared publicly. Babis is also able to identify the 2 guns that these intruders had. It's estimated that not only did they take 10,000 euros in cash, they also took around 20,000 euros worth of valuables. Police believe that this was a meticulously planned attack and the intruders would have watched the family for days before. They also would have known that they had that amount of cash in the property. What shocked the police and the local community as well was the fact that these intruders murdered a mother in front of her infant. This was incredibly unusual. It was brutal and callous. And if the motive was money, it was just completely unnecessary, unless the intruders were panicked because of Caroline screaming or they were high on drugs. What also puzzled police was why did they tie up the man and fight the woman? There was also no evidence of sexual assault. So police begin looking at CCTV and they do see a black car that morning cruising the local area, going right near Caroline and Babis's apartment. It is then closely followed by a motorbike. A few days into the investigation, police randomly pull over a car and ask the driver for his passport. They immediately see that this is a fake and realise this is a well-known criminal, 36-year-old Georgie. He is a wanted man for committing many burglaries in the local area. He's also known to be violent. On one of these burglaries, he dragged a young female out by her hair and threatened to slit her throat. In another, he tied up an elderly couple along with their cleaning lady and threatened to beat them. So Georgie is brought in for questioning and he is held for 4 days, and within that time he is tied up, he is beaten, but he vehemently denies any involvement in the Caroline Crouch case. He was beaten up so badly that Georgie was left with concussion. After 4 days they release him and he is cleared of any involvement in this crime. Because of his treatment, 3 officers were demoted and they are no closer to finding the killer. During this time, the community is scared. More burglaries are happening, although they aren't as violent, but people are demanding police find this murderer. Police are feeling an immense amount of pressure and are coming under fire from the local community and the press. Babis, however, is grateful for the police efforts. He often talks to the media to keep Caroline's name in the press. On June the 17th, roughly a month after Caroline's murder, a vigil is held on one of the Greek islands. Family and close friends arrive to share stories of Caroline. Partway through the service, lead detectives from Caroline's case arrive. They hang back and wait for the ceremony to finish, and then they approach Babis to say that they have found a new suspect. They want Babis to return with them to Athens to identify him. Babis tells Caroline's mother he has to go, they have a lead, and they think they found Caroline's murderer. Babis and Caroline met in 2017 on one of the Greek islands. Caroline was just 15 at the time and she was attending school there. Babis was 27, 12 years Caroline's senior. He was doing some pilot training there, and when Caroline was just 15 years old, they began dating. Caroline is a child and Babis is a grown adult, and he would fly his helicopter over the school in order to impress her, which I think is really weird. Despite concerns from family and friends about the age gap, Caroline assured them that she had found her soulmate. Babis proposed 2 years later in 2019 and they married the following year. Caroline felt really lucky to have met Babis. He was good looking, charming, he was also very well off. And if you were an outsider looking in, especially on social media, they seemed to have this dream relationship, this perfect family life. So for all intents and purposes, Caroline and Babis had this wonderfully happy marriage. Babis is escorted by police back to Athens. He is brought into an interview room where police inform him that they suspect he is the murderer. Police have believed this from the start. When they encountered that scene, one of the police officers was so disturbed at how cold Babis was towards his dead wife that she took the young infant daughter away from him. And over the course of the investigation, things didn't really add up, but police kept their cards very close to their chest. Whenever the press accused Babis, they vehemently denied it. They wanted Babis to believe that they were on his side in order that he didn't flee and he didn't try and cover up his tracks. And it worked perfectly. Because Babis was so confident in the fact that police weren't looking at him, he was very blasé about things. So the basement window in which these 3 intruders were meant to have broken into, first of all, it didn't really look like it had been broken into. Secondly, it was incredibly small for 3 men to go through, one of which Babis openly described as being overweight. Even though the house was ransacked, it felt staged. It didn't feel like a true burglary. Also, when they questioned the neighbours, and remember this is a maisonette apartment, the neighbours said they heard nothing. They didn't hear any screaming, they didn't hear anyone kind of stomping around, they didn't hear anyone throwing things over or the place being ransacked. All they heard was the puppy barking. The question that really bugged police though was, why restrain a male and fight a female? Not just that, Caroline fought with her attacker for 6 minutes. When they swabbed under her fingernails, they found no other DNA apart from Babis's. There were many home invasions in the suburbs of Athens, but what was very unusual about this one was that the intruders had ripped the home security system from the wall. Most intruders just take the whole thing. Also, the memory card had been removed, and when they looked at the data that revealed when this happened, it came up at 1:20 a.m, over 3 hours before Babis claimed the intruders actually entered. Caroline was also wearing a smartwatch at the time, and this monitored her heart rate. At 3:53 a.m, you can see that she is in a deep sleep. At 4:05 a.m, her heart rate races as if she's stressed or she's being attacked. And at 4:11 a.m, 6 minutes later, her heart stops, signalling that this is when Caroline died. This was 20 minutes before Babis said the intruders arrived. Babis's phone also had an app that tracked his activity, and they could see that he was walking around that apartment. He wasn't tied up at all. Police also tried to recreate the scenario in which Babis is tied up, but he manages to get to his phone and dial the emergency services with his nose. They just couldn't do it. They couldn't recreate it. Looking at text messages between Caroline and Babis, it would seem that Caroline actually booked a hotel for her and her daughter to stay in that night. She wanted to leave Babis, so their relationship was far from perfect. After they married, Caroline was a university student and she was completely financially dependent on Babis, who was a commercial pilot. Babis was very manipulative and had complete control over Caroline. Even when her mother sent Caroline money, Babis would take it. Greek weddings are usually huge parties with lots of family and friends. However, Babis convinced Caroline to elope, and when they returned, he purposefully isolated her from family and friends. Caroline kept a diary, and from 2019 she wrote that she had serious doubts about their relationship and she wanted to leave. They fought a lot and she said the relationship hurt her. But in 2020 she falls pregnant and she wants her child to be brought up in a 2-parent household, so she decides to stay. When their little girl is 1 month old, she's had enough and she informs Babis that she wants a divorce, she's gonna leave, and she's already found a house. Babis convinces or forces her to stay. Caroline clearly still wants to leave, and a few months later, she is murdered. At the station, after 8 hours of interrogation, Babis finally confesses. He says that they had a fairy tale relationship up until the point that Caroline gave birth, after which he said that Caroline became moody, angry, she was a terrible mother, and that he murdered her to save their daughter. On that particular evening, Babis said that Caroline was screaming at him, saying she was going to leave and take their baby girl. Babis saw red. He grabbed a pillow, pushed Caroline onto the bed, and put his full body weight down onto her, suffocating her to death, all in front of their child. Afterwards, he sat there and thought about what he could do and decided to come up with the idea of a home invasion. He didn't want his daughter growing up with no parents, so he staged a burglary and at the last moment placed his daughter on top of her dead mother. Babis's story is an attempt to get more sympathy, and you often find this with domestic abuse cases, that the attacker will try to twist the narrative to make them seem like the victim. He said it was a crime of passion, again a defence often used by domestic abuse cases. It was far from a crime of passion, and it was a relationship of control and manipulation. The fact that he tries to paint Caroline in such a bad light, saying that she was an awful mother, actually shows that he has no remorse. Just because Caroline perhaps fought back, and she may have fought back verbally and physically and wanted to leave, still makes her a victim. It's often when the victim decides to leave that the violence escalates and can lead to murder. When they got together, Babis targeted a child. Caroline was just 15 years old, and this was someone that he believed he could probably control. He made her completely financially reliant on him. She also had very little life experience at just such a young age, getting into such a serious relationship, which made her more vulnerable. When Caroline's mother was informed that Babis was the murderer, she was in complete shock. She had full trust in Babis. Once this information broke, the term wife was removed from Caroline's headstone. Babis was charged with premeditated murder, perverting the course of justice, and animal abuse. When he arrived at court, he had to wear a bulletproof vest. He was the most hated man in Greece. Despite this, there were still a bunch of middle-aged women who kind of adored him. They said they found him charming, charismatic, said he was sensitive, with one woman saying her whole bedroom wall is covered in pictures of him. It does seem as though if a good-looking person commits murder, they will always have some kind of odd fan base. The prosecution argues that this was completely premeditated. He removed the memory card from the security camera 3 hours before, and he attacked her whilst she slept. He is found guilty on all charges and given life in prison. Prison life has been very difficult for Babis, as he is often targeted and beaten up by the nationality of the men he accused his crime on. He tried to muster the kind of xenophobic, nationalistic fear of immigration in Greece by trying to place the blame of his crime on immigrants. This case of domestic abuse is something that I wanted to share because often relationships appear to be perfect on the outside when really the victim is suffering in silence. It's not always obvious. My name's Emma. This has been the case of Caroline Crouch. If you like my content, please remember to like, subscribe and comment, and I will see you in the next one.